Welcome back, as per everybody says. Today I want to show you behind the scenes on how this lovely poster came into existence, like how I did everything, all the little details that I did during it, and the drama that happened behind it, because obviously it was a huge file. It's probably one of the bigger files I've ever done, and Photoshop decided to crash about 3 times in the process of making this, so if you would like to see what happened during the making of this and what I did, then keep on watching. Thank you. Okay, so first I want to go ahead and show you how I sort of had the file set up in the first place. This is the close to final product of the actual piece itself. I had the work area, which is where you see the final product, and then I had my sort of reference area where I have the reference photo I used primarily. Actually, I used it in most, if not all, the drawings in this, except for the girl, which we'll see a little bit later on. And then I had made my own palette out of that reference image to put into the final image, and that's what you see sort of below that reference image right there. So that's how my work area looked, and here you'll see the beginnings of the piece where I scribbled in the general area I wanted everything to be. So the light brown is the path, dark brown is the trees. I had a light green, dark green to show where I wanted leaves, and then the faded blue is how I wanted to show that there was actual space. So on the final image there was that big giant space of blue to sort of like set back the image itself. And then after I finally got the general placement of where I want everything to go, I went back in using more of the reference image this time and sketched out a little bit more detail into the piece itself. So now you can see the leaves I want to go in there, where I want branches to go, where I want the darker leaves to be to show more depth, and the general area of the foreground, middle ground, background areas in the piece itself. And then afterwards I decided I wanted to have a little bit more guidelines than this, so I went over top. I made it a little bit more opaque so I could go over top and sketch in leaves and branches and how I wanted the tinier details to look and how I wanted everything to be placed a little bit more cohesively, I guess is the right term. I'm not sure. So I did another sketch over that to make sure I had the general idea I wanted to come through this piece. So now let's get into the actual making of this piece. Here you'll see there's the first crash. Sorry about that. So here you'll see the fully placement of where I want everything, and I'm actually going over top of that with another layer of the leaves, and then taking a sort of leafy texture brush and going through the edges to make that sort of leaf texture. And then I go over that and I sort of make that layer to where I can't paint out of it, and I go in and briefly sketch out the general shading I want going on. Get another crash. So here I accidentally forgot to turn the camera back on. So right now you're just watching me paint on physical leaves to branches I wanted to have poking out to give a little bit more detail. But what I had done in the time that I forgot to turn the camera back on is I used that general sketch to go back in with that leaf brush, and I'm doing general shading on the trees. Go in with the leaf brush again and pick out about 3 different colors and add in a bit more depth to those leaves. And I did that with the front layer and the back layer using various shades of greens and blues. And now I'm actually going in and adding the bark texture to those trunks. I again made them so I couldn't actually color out of them. Added the bark texture, and then I'm actually going to blur that a little bit to add a little bit more depth to those. And that's really all I did to the trees. I didn't actually give much attention to those because I really wanted to pay more attention to those leaves, as that is a thing of mine I'm still working on. One of the critiques I actually got on this piece was that the leaves in the background and the leaves in the foreground were the same size. During the making of this, I didn't pay much attention to that, and you can actually see me doing that shading variation I did with the leaf brush here. I didn't pay much attention to that because I was working more on just getting that general leaf texture going on. So in the future, I am going to pay more attention to the sizes of that leaf brush and making sure that I'm using a good variations of color as well, because throughout this entire semester, my greens have been the same greens and my blues have been the same blues, so I need to work on variation as well. So now I am adding a little bit more detail to those individual leaves And I actually don't spend too much time on these either. I do the lines, I do some basic shading, and that's relatively it. But you can see with those trunks, they look like wood. It's not the best in the world, but it's gonna do the job for me and I'm okay with it. And I went back with that leaf brush and actually erased some of it to make it look like they're coming in and out of those leaves as well. Adding in some light to those leaves to make them come to the foreground a little bit more as they are in the foreground. And making them fit with the rest of the piece a little bit more as well. And now I have skipped to the road because again I forgot to turn the camera on. So here we are with the grass, and I again forgot to turn the camera back on, but I did basically the same general thing I did with the leaves, only with a grass brush instead. And I'm going back in over top of that to add a little bit more extra shading to it. Again, using various shades of greens and blues to hopefully bring that out a little bit more. As you saw a little bit earlier, I used a different sort of brush to flare out the edges a little bit, make them blend in a little bit more with the gravel that I forgot to record as well. And here I'm adding a little bit more variation to the grass to hopefully make it more realistic, even though it is a more painted scene. Adding in some yellows because it was again too green, and then making that more cohesive with the piece itself as well. And then here you'll see me start doing a little bit of variation with depth again, using some fog to hopefully bring the background to the back and the foreground forward. Adding in some more detail to that little fade I have going on with the gravel. And you'll see a little bit later on how I actually did the gravel as well, because I did that first to sort of get it out of the way, because I was not prepared to do it. And with the leaves now, I'm actually making everything fit more into place because I realized that the most frontward leaves were too bright. So I had to bring that forward a little bit more. So here I had selected the first little bit of gravel and actually put that on its own layer so I could actually take to the back gravel underneath the tiger and make it more detailed and sort of front, I guess, because the middle is where I wanted everything to be more crisp, while the back and the super front were what I wanted to be more blurred to sort of bring all the focus to that tiger. So here I did like basic sketching out of color, and that was basically the gravel. I blurred the front a little bit more to add that depth again. I'm blurring the trunks again to make more depth. And then a little bit later on you'll see me select out the backmost leaves and blur them as well. Adding a little bit more detail with more variations of leaves and foliage to hopefully bring the front more front, blur that. And you can see those two leaves right there are actually pointing towards the center, towards the tiger, to bring your eye to the tiger. Some more fog to hopefully put that back a little bit more. And checking everything because I forgot to name my layers. Doing that blur like I said. Putting everything into files so that my little workspace is less cluttered. And now we're going to go work on the actual characters themselves. So here I'm working on Kumari. I usually do, whenever I'm actually sketching out characters, I do the box gesture method where I actually draw the rib cage and then the pelvis, and then I do box shapes around it to get the general portions correct. I still do a sketchy phase over it because arms are terrible. And as you can see, I had to like adjust the arm right there, and then I'll still have to adjust the leg a little bit later on, I think. or not, I just go with it. Okay. And not much detail is going into her, as it will be small. I still put a little bit too much detail in her to the point where you can't even see it anymore, but that's okay. That was more for me and my enjoyment than people seeing it. Like that braid part didn't need to be there, but that was because it's part of her character and I needed it to be there. Doing some very quick line art to get that over with. And now onto the tiger. So I had to copy paste the tiger so that I could get the portions correct. And as you can see with this, I actually did more of a super quick general sketch of it. More like I colored in like I did with the background. But here I'm more free-handed, I guess you could say, because I have more experience drawing animals than I do people. So the tiger proportions came easier to me than the actual human proportions, so I was more comfortable with just going for it. Doing in the line work super fast. And I'll do more videos actually tutorialing how I do my line work, how I do my shading, processes that go behind pieces a little bit more. So I do apologize if this is a little bit lengthy, and I do apologize if it kind of sucks at the moment. This is my first voiceover ever, so I'm sorry. Whenever I do colors, I do it all on one layer, so I actually section out the areas I want colored, make that layer to where you can't color out of it, and then go ham on colors. So here you can actually see that I'm actually painting in the various fur tones of the tiger to make it look more natural and more like fur, even though it is a heavy lined piece. I like the general look that comes out of this. So you see that I do the light pieces, and then I go in and I paint in the stripes and go back over with the light to make them more cohesive with the actual piece. Painting in the stripes to fit the form that it is taking at the moment. So that leg coming forward, the stripes are actually moving up to make the leg come forward a little bit more, and following the motion of the muscles in the leg itself. Adding in those final little touches. And then here it actually crashed again, so I forgot to turn it back on. Here you can see me doing some very basic cell shading. I didn't take too much time on this because I knew that I was going to do mostly painted in shading, where I actually do the cell shading, I make it a layer that you can't paint out of, and then I paint into it to make it sort of fade in and out in areas, and you'll see that a little bit later on, to both the tiger and Kumari herself to make it fit more into the background. So it's very basic cell shading going on right now, where I add in and take away what I need. And the white areas are what's the light, and the red is what is the shade. And again, I'll do a tutorial on how I do my shading a little bit later on. Very basic shading on her, because again, she's in the very back, so not very many people are going to see her. And then soon you'll see me pull up the full piece, like right now, and I start to adjust the color of the shade itself to fit more in with the background. And then I take that color and I make it darker and lighter as I need to do that painted in fade effect. And And that is basically all the shade that goes into the characters. I'm adding in the final detail now of a shadow underneath to make it fit in a little bit more with the background. I'm doing a little bit more atmospheric shading now to make the foreground a little bit darker, the background a little bit more lighter, adding in a sort of atmospheric fog. Sign it, date it, stick it in the corner, and basically we are done. What I did after this is I just put in the words and called it a day, printed it, took it to critique, and that was the end of that. So thank you for watching. Bye!